Gretchen Clausing, and I'm the Executive Director of PhillyCAM. And I'm pleased to welcome you here to join in this conversation about Philadelphia stories. PhillyCAM is pleased to be kicking off a 4-month retrospective of this landmark broadcast series that was on WYBE TV 35 from 2001 to 2011. And I'm thrilled to be joined by the series executive producer, Hébert Peck. Hébert Peck has made his career in independent media and public broadcasting, producing and supporting work that explores social issues. He produced the critically acclaimed documentary, I Am Not Your Negro, about the life of James Baldwin, for which he received a Best Documentary Feature nomination at the Academy Awards, together with director Raoul Peck and producer Remy Grelletti. For 8 years, Hébert managed Scribe Video Center, where he facilitated the production of over 50 film and video documentaries by independent media makers and community organizations. And in addition to his work as a producer, he teaches television production as an adjunct professor for Rutgers University's iTV studios and oversees Rutgers University TV network. No stranger to a TV studio, he is joining me here to talk today about Philadelphia Stories and about his work with WYBE TV, where he was the executive producer of Philadelphia Stories. Welcome. This is so great to have you here.
Well, thank you for inviting me. As you're reading this bio, I'm saying, who is that guy? But thank you very much. I would like to correct that the executive producer was really the station manager at the time. It was Sherry Culver.
Okay.
And I was the producer and the person who was given the opportunity to create this.
Well, let's talk about that. So we're going to kind of go back and I think to kind of place it in a context. So this was kind of prior to 2001 was when the work started to happen on the series. But at that point, there was no streaming TV. There was no, there was no Netflix. There was, no Hulu. There wasn't other platforms like social media platforms. So for independent film producers, having a broadcast premiere on a local television station was quite significant because places where they could have where audiences could see their work was limited. So can you talk a little bit about kind of how the idea came about to have this kind of series that would really celebrate the work of Philadelphia independent filmmakers at WYBE?
Yeah, and for those who don't know about WYBE, it was actually PhillyCAM is the closest thing, I would imagine. And it was a place where community people as well as independent filmmakers and video makers had an opportunity to create content, but also the station itself tried to create content that was important to the community at large in Philadelphia. It was quite unique for a public broadcaster. But that being said, so the directives that we received were really to create this 13-part series that would highlight the work that comes out of this rich fabric that Philadelphia is, and that would also provide some funding to 3 categories of works. One was for brand new works, provide grants for that. The second category was to provide funding for finishing work, and the third was really for acquisition. And at the time, the rate that we were paying per minute was really pretty competitive nationwide. I think we were paying $100 a minute. And so for independent filmmakers, as you know, who, especially if they're at the beginning of their career, do 3 or 4 jobs and then actually create work. And so being able to receive funding or money for their work was really important. So with that in mind, really there was a challenge in terms of figuring out, well, how do you make sure that the spirit of the series, which was really to create access, but create access to stories that hadn't necessarily been told on broadcast television, and also providing access to people who whose film may have never been seen on television was a bit of a challenge, but not really because of the following fact. There's a vibrant community in Philadelphia in terms of filmmakers, independent filmmakers and video makers. And also there are many organizations, social issue organizations, grassroots organizations that create content to further their work, to create awareness of issues that are important to neighborhoods, communities, and of the sort. So my job was really to figure out how do I create that access in a very structured manner, and also to create a television series. So it had to be engaging as well. So that's where it started. And the nice thing was that for a young producer at the time, I really had a lot of liberties and the trust of WYBE's management. At the time was Sherry Culver.
So when you talk about liberties, like, what do you mean?
Well, for instance, knowing that these were the categories, one of the things I wanted to make sure was that the process was fair. And so for two of the categories, where we were awarding new funding for new projects, and the categories where we were providing finishing funds, I wanted to have a panel that was made up of local filmmakers and also people from the community who knew about Philadelphia, so that they could review the applications, and based on what filmmakers were proposing, that it resonated with the community, and there was some truth behind the proposals. And so, and the third category, which was acquisition, that I left it to myself to curate, because it provided an opportunity also to bring in work that maybe was finished, that had some limited run in Philadelphia or the region, or that had never been seen on television, but that were important for the community to see. And so then that's how actually I started figuring out how to create this.
Because it was called Philadelphia Stories, like, as you were curating, or we were kind of reviewing projects, like, in your mind, what were some of the key things that a work had to have to make it feel like it?
That's actually an interesting question, because I had to figure out what that meant. What are the criteria to be part of the series, mm-hmm. right? So at first I thought, well, the filmmakers have to be based in Philadelphia, which is great, but sometimes you can be based out of South Jersey or Delaware and are creating content about the city. And you actually could be across the country and creating content about that is really important to the city. So with that in mind, I kind of opened it up to say that it's about local filmmakers, but also it's about Philadelphia stories. So with that, we were able to open up the call for works kind of nationwide.
Well, and I also think what was exciting about it was because it was, at the time, it would be like a 13-week series, and mm-hmm. it would have a premiere screening event and would bring people together, and then it would kind of run sequentially on the channel. It was really kind of putting a spotlight on the community, which was also, I think was helpful, because mm-hmm. then, the press would pay attention, festivals would pay attention, yes. funders, would pay attention. And I think that sort of helped kind of build in the bedrock, to give the community kind of more legitimacy and more visibility, So,
yes.
Are there any, it's interesting because in looking at the programs, a lot of the works were still being shot on film, or they were, being shot, on, mini DV and film and all these, different
16 millimeter, 8 millimeter,
all these different formats. And So I was wondering, do you have any kind of memories of particular projects or particular episodes that you were excited about and how they kind of represented the series?
Well, it's hard to choose one or two because it was quite eclectic. And I remember we were trying to make sure that we included animation, and because many stories are told through animation, but independent animators often don't get their work seen on television. So we were really happy when we were able to attract these animators. I remember Lowell Boston from, at the time he was probably still teaching at the University of the Arts. And so having that kind of work was really good because it also challenged folks to create new work and also take a chance on themselves. Because as you know, the way our industry runs, especially with the influence of commercial media, often filmmakers or creators feel attracted to create to earn. Mm-hmm. And so, although it is a creative process, sometimes they don't always get to create what they are passionate about. And so I think Philadelphia Story provided that outlet for many. And I think that was a great thing. Mm. You know?
Well, yeah, and what was fun about it was that, again, it didn't look like the television that you were typically accustomed to tuning into, because it would feature a number of short works within an hour, and like you said, would shift the genres radically from like one episode to from one film to the next.
Yeah, the curating aspect was a bit challenging. So imagine that when we're selecting work for just to go through the awarding process. The panel's really not saying, oh, we need this length or that length. Most of the time we would say, at least in the application, that it's up to 15 minutes and we may look at 30 minutes. But that we would accept everything in between because we wanted to make it as inclusive as possible. For instance, for an animation, it would be very difficult for someone to deliver a 15-minute short animation, but they could probably deliver 3, 2, or 5 minutes. So once we awarded the pieces based on the evaluation by the panels, now I had to figure out, well, how do we create 13 hours and that have some sort of theme for each broadcast. And so that was a long process, but the good thing is that we had that acquisition pot, which allowed us to figure out how to create a concise series as much as possible, so that we would see what was a great hour, and with what we had in terms of the 2 first categories, and then figure out, well, who do we need to reach out to, which communities that would whose work would really work well with that 1 hour, and that was a bit of a struggle, but it was quite fun.
This is a bit of a strange question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. So, when you were doing the work on the series, it was important that the series have kind of like a look and feel and a graphic design for the logo, so that it was recognizable. And you worked with a local designer, Kevin Deal, on the initial kind of look. And it has this like kind of sewer grate. And I was just wondering if you could talk about like what, for you and Kevin, like that represented for the series.
There's a couple of things. One is, I can't remember how we decided on the grade. It might have been because Kevin had a series of photographs as we were trying to come up with a concept, a series of photographs that he had taken. And I remember seeing the grade, and there was something about it that said, unseen work that said, things that are done by people you don't see, that are somehow part of the structure of the city. There was something about the metal, and then there was a larger picture that showed the cobblestone, and it made me think about, well, if you go down, you realize that every neighborhood is connected, and so that although at the time, of course, there was no real internet as we have now, where we are connected with,
a series
of course,
of pipes.
of course we are. You just plug in your, or through Wi-Fi. But this was almost this sense of that, as the viewer, you could almost go underneath the city, and you come up in a place where you come in a neighborhood that you probably didn't know anything about. But then you realize that you're kind of connected through this internet underneath the ground, and so that's what it meant to me. There was something about that connection, and that was not always apparent to people, based on the conversations they were having, based on what communities were saying about other communities, but maybe by connecting them through these, what do you call them, manhole, there was something that could happen. And so we talked about that, and then we began to figure out, well, Kevin is a great designer and also a musician. And so he had several comps that he came up with, and so we wanted first an open and also some interstitials to put in between each pieces that would announce the next pieces. And then music was important too. So the music was created by this composer and actually a good friend who passed away, Philip Parker. And so it was original content. So basically we gave him the idea of what the series was about, and showed him some imagery, and then he came up with the score for the series.
Oh, that's so cool. Thank you. I mean, well, no, because, it was always, I think, up for interpretation, and I appreciate you kind of hearing that, because I actually really like this idea of filmmakers as part of like the infrastructure, in the city.
I may have touched on it earlier, but I do want to spend some time talking about that. So we had independent filmmakers, but also we had members of community organizations who had been doing a lot of work to inform the larger community, but also their community in terms of issues that were important. And so, and I'm talking there about organizations, and well, if PhillyCAM had been there at the time, but I'm talking about places like Scribe, there were even a Camden community organizations that was doing work in Camden. There were even small collaboratives like Termite TV,
Big Picture Alliance.
Big Picture Alliance, that were all doing really interesting things. And although they had screening events for their work, and continue to do so, but some of the work that came out of those particular organizations were, I felt, needed time on television. And so we were able to work with them and invite them to present some of the work they felt were strong to be on television. And so that I believe was, to me, that was really important.
Well, it's cool because Scribe, Big Picture Alliance are two media organizations that continue to thrive and grow and have a significant impact here in the city. Termite TV is still active and is going to be having an anniversary coming up that they're going to be celebrating. I think it's 30 years this year. And one of the first episodes that we'll be screening as part of the retrospective, features work by two of the termites, Mike Kudemeyer and Anula Shetty, about the garden in Norris Square that they had done a film about many years ago, and they're returning to that garden now, doing work in like VR and AR. And so again, just to kind of see how there's we're kind of going back in time, but then like telling stories in new ways. So it's kind of nice to see that continuity. You kind of were going right where I was wanting to go, and that was kind of, you worked at Scribe for 8 years, and worked with many of the community organizations that were through the Community Visions program and Precious Places, who were having video cameras put in their hands for the first time to be able to tell their stories. So you firsthand could see how media work could be used as a tool for community building and community organizing. And I feel as you look through the seasons, you were taking different issues that were maybe happening, or that were of the moment, that were happening, whether it was education reform or again, like we mentioned, criminal justice. Was that something intentional as how you approached it?
So we over the years, I think we tried to try to shift the series to address some things that were happening in the region or in the city. School reform was one of them, and so for that year we created a fourth category that was really a themed category, where we invited filmmakers to give us proposals that address school reform in Philadelphia. And then from that list of submissions, we were able to select one. And really to try to create a dialogue, because at the time it was a very heated issue in the city. But we wanted to get an independent filmmaker to look at all of the issues from their perspective, but also from a broader perspective that maybe people didn't think of, based on what we were getting on television or even sometimes in the newspapers. That's one of the things we were able to do. So of course I would check with Cherry to see if she was okay with, let's see if we could adjust the series this particular years in some of those years to address certain issues. And so that flexibility was really important, and created some more interesting things.
Well, and again, that kind of change takes time, right? And so it was only just a year or so ago that Philadelphia has its own, independent school board again, where it wasn't like under control of the governor. So, I think that kind of is again the power of the series, like you'd said earlier, of being able to, for people that are doing that kind of work today, to be like, oh, but wait, you guys were doing this like 20 years ago, and okay, so to again to not, like you had said to me when we spoke on the phone, so that folks don't get discouraged, and they see that people have been doing this work before them, and how to kind of continue on,
because when you look at let's say another creative category like journalism, it's an important field to inform us about what we should know, about what we don't know, about how our world is running or not. And so, but journalism tend to be current issues and then moves on, right? And we have come to a place where sometimes it's even hard for newspapers to, or even newsrooms to invest in long-form reporting that take time, that also, once they're created, you have something that will last for a while. So documentaries and independent creative works tends to have longevity and tend to spend a lot of time on creating content that will last, in a sense. So when you look at many of the work coming out of Philadelphia Stories, I think it helps create that library of important works that you can go to and educate you, to help you move to the next step in terms of whatever it is that you're interested in. Whether those are environmental issues, climate issues, rights issues, social justice, and there were many pieces that just talked about love. So I think, the entire human experience. And so, that was great. That's really, I think that's important.
Well, thank you for sitting down with me to talk about this. I hope we can do it justice. I hope folks will be excited to kind of dive in, and I look forward to kind of reconnecting with all the filmmakers who've been featured in this series, and that potentially we'll be able to kind of jump off and start a new version of Philadelphia Stories in the not too distant future. So, but anyway.
Yeah, and the last thing is really that I'm in looking back at everything, I really, I'm kind of thankful and kind of grateful that that I got that gig and they trusted me to do this. I mean, really, I only had very few marching orders, and so I'm kind of grateful about that, and that it turned out the way it did.
Yeah, well, I personally was very grateful that you had the series, that you were doing it. I really feel like you were a mentor for many people, and really were kind of that kind of convener and cheerleader for all of us, and how you put this together. And again, super appreciative of WYBE and how they were that alternative public broadcasting station. Of course, I'm thrilled that there is now the Independence Public Media Foundation, and that the station has transitioned into a new way to support media makers. But being able to have a series like this created at that time was really wonderful. And appreciate that you could be here to talk about the series. And I hope people are going to check it out and dive in with us. So thank you for being here.
Well, thank you for having me, and thank you for showing this again.
Great. And so if folks are interested in finding out more about Philadelphia Stories and joining us over the next 4 months as we do the retrospective, you can find out more at phillycam.org.